live from the beautiful city of New Orleans in Louisiana, and we're at 107.7 FM. And we're doing really good there, I think. And thank you, Preston. We're also at the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3. And the first one was the United Public Radio Network. We're having a good day here. And we're on Roku, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, and I'm just flabbergasted. We have a wonderful guest, and we were chatting earlier and waiting for the show to start, and I just got all excited. This is a person who's from Wisconsin, and I'm so happy about this. I'm just going to turn it right over to you, Preston. Go.
Thanks, Dolly. I hope you all can see us. All right, well, let's get going. Welcome, everyone, to The Light Gate. Can you believe it? This is episode 50. So it's kind of an anniversary there. It's pretty much just about a year. In 2 weeks, it will be 1 year, if I'm counting correctly. 52 weeks per year. So yeah, episode 50 of The Light Gate. I'm your host, Preston Dennett. And of course, my lovely co-host is Dolly Safran, contactee. And yeah, we have an exciting show tonight. We had a little bit of a hiccup last time we tried to bring him on. His power went out. These things happen, so we just jumped into a Q&A, but no, he's ready and waiting now. So this is going to be awesome. I've been following his research for a while. But before I bring him in, you know, I love to say hi to all you guys in chat because it's you that we do this show for. We have a wonderful little community here. It's growing fast. But I just really am just absolutely tickled to see all these familiar names here each week. So I just have to say hi to all of you guys. And let's start with you, Aussie Jen, first in chat. And a huge, huge thank you, Aussie Jen, for the super sticker. It means a lot. I am eternally grateful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Fun Talks TV, hello from Poland. Say hi in Polish, Dolly. One of these days I'm going to learn that. But I covered a Polish case recently on my YouTube channel. I hope you got a chance to see that. Cases taking place from all over the world. And who else do we have here? Nipa Koku. I can't read that. Hej from Sevrij.
No, hey, from Sverige. Hey, du,
Hello, Louise from New Jersey. Hope you're doing well. And W. Decker. We're definitely going to have a great show, even better now that you're here. And thank you for the super chat. And hello, Mary R. And who else do we got here? Thirsty. Always nice to see you here, Thirsty. And Louise, oh my goodness. Thank you, Louise. Very, very kind of you. And just absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. We have Janice Conant. Happy Solstice Day. Hope some of you got to see the eclipse.
Right.
Pretty cool. I didn't get to see it in its totality, but I have seen a total solar eclipse twice before. And it was really cool even to see it partially. So who else do we got here? Namaste. Namaste, namaste. Thank you. You are truly generous. You guys just warm my heart each and every week. And Heidi Hansen, wow, you are just beyond generous. I mean, that is amazing.
Love you. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
We love you so much. Not only for the super chat, but for staying all the way up to 3:02 a.m. I can barely do that. So thank you, Heidi. We're going to have a great show. Make you proud, I hope. Catherine Fourfeathers, hello. And Crazy Horse, hope you're doing well. Oh gosh, you guys, so many of you here. Olivia, hope all is well. And Allison Carr and Jenny Lynn and Linda Catlett. And oh my goodness, Terry, thank you so much.
You.
Don't know what we did, Dolly, in a past life to deserve so much love from people. But thank you. Oh, I do want to give out a hi to Amanita, who is sleeping right now in the UK, but will be joining us tomorrow morning. So hi, Amanita. She's so sorry she can't reach the live. So I just had to give you a shout out, Amanita. Hope you're having pleasant dreams right now. Who else do we have? Anjay and Pogo Joe. and Ruth Kleiber. Boy, our audience is growing so fast. That is really cool. Me, Mike, Lightgate is awesome. I hope so. Thank you, thank you, thank you. One our wedding. Greetings from Columbia, South Carolina.
Colombia. ¿Cómo estás?
Suqua 29K.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. Goodness gracious. We have quite a crowd here today. KM, aka Aunt Cat Sadik. Nice. Thank you for joining us. John P. Adventures and Octopus with No Friends. I'm very glad you made it too. And oh my goodness, Suqua 29K, a super sticker. Thank you so much. Gosh, that is just incredibly generous of all you guys. But I could say hi to you forever. Some of you are still dropping in. So hello to Kelly. Oh, you saw the total eclipse. Awesome.
Awesome. Yeah.
And Cherie and Jagan Thompson and Dimitri Bert. Okay, I'm going to get in trouble if I don't start now because our guest has a lot to share. He's been in this field for a very long time. I've followed his research. I've really benefited from him. He's very highly respected. There's not a whole lot of researchers out there I truly respect, and I do our guest. I think he's awesome, and his name is Donald Schmitt. Donald R. Schmitt. He is the author and founder of the International UFO Museum and Research Center in Roswell. If you ever get a chance to visit that, that's the first place you want to go. It's one of the best museums out there. He's also the former co-director of the J. Allen Center for UFO Studies, CUFOS, a really good UFO organization. So yeah, we are very happy to welcome researcher and author Donald R. Schmitt. He's an author, a journalist, a lecturer, and as I said, former co-director of CUFOS and the museum in Roswell, which aims to preserve any material or media related to Roswell and to be a source for information on UFO incidents globally. It's funny, the millionth visitor there was someone who had the last name Dennett. No relation to me, but I thought, oh, wow, that was a cool coincidence. Just a quick tangent there. At any rate, during Donald's time at CUFOS, he served 10 years as the Director of Special Investigations, and along with Thomas J. Carey, he also co-authored the books Witness to Roswell, The Children of Roswell, which you can see here, and Inside the Real Area 51, all of which, by the way, became bestsellers. He's the North American representative at the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research and co-producer for the Phenomenon movie. Oh, wow, that's awesome. He has appeared on pretty much all the major radio shows and podcasts, including, of course, Coast to Coast. You may have seen him at numerous conventions. He's quite active on the lecture circuit. So it is a true, honest-to-God treat and honor to have him joining us tonight on the Lightgate. I'm now going to bring you on, Donald.
And here I am.
Hey, welcome.
Yes.
Thank you. And again, my apologies to your audience that I had to deal with Mother Nature the last time. But fingers crossed that we'll make this a full show. So just in case that you do have some Q&A ready, if I my flying saucer picks me up in a little earlier than I expect, and I may shut out. But
yes, well, I know we were talking before the show where you live, Wisconsin. I know that area, actually. It's the home of my favorite science fiction writer, Clifford Simak.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he wrote about it extensively in his stories, so I'm kind of familiar with it secondhand.
As you mentioned, Preston, it was something that I was more on a dare some years ago. The idea that, you attend all these UFO conferences and you're essentially preaching to the choir. And I've always loved debating skeptics, but the debunkers, the scoffers.
Yeah.
And I've debated the late Philip J. Klass and Robert Schaefer and James McGaha, and Amazing Randy and Joe Nichols. And I'm even losing track after all these years. But I found that one of the biggest nuts to crack was doing the sci-fi conventions. And, you know, I finally realized that, well, it essentially was a case of we were making their nonfiction. I mean, excuse me, we were making their fiction into nonfiction. We were encroaching on their territory, and they were threatened by that. But once, you know, I crossed that line, I was getting invited to sci-fi conventions. I went 5 years. I was a VIP at Dragon Con, which is the second largest, you know, sci-fi convention in the world.
I lived in Atlanta. I was there every year. I lived in Atlanta. No kidding.
I've done the Comic Cons. I've done WindyCon.
Yeah.
I've done, you know, just all these wonderful, you know, sci-fi conventions. I did 2 years on the road with William Shatner, where I would do an hour on Roswell, and then he would do, you know, his hour. It would just be like a 2-man show. And quick story, if we have a moment.
Yeah.
We had just done, William Shatner and I had just done the Lubbock Coliseum in Lubbock, Texas. And we had to catch a plane to do the San Antonio Theater that evening. So from Lubbock, we flew to Dallas, and then we're racing through Dallas International. And it's the producer, Rick Starnes, myself, and Shatner. And he's got this huge leather garment bag over his shoulder, which was as big as a saddle, a horse's saddle. Mm-hmm. And he's wearing these little granny sunglasses, and everyone is doing double takes because not only are we hastily, you know, maneuvering between, you know, all the traffic through the airport, but they're all recognizing him. So we just make it to the gate in time. Well, we land, and we're being chauffeured to the theater. And I'm in the back seat with Bill, and he would always say, "Call me Bill, call me Bill." That's how he was with me, and that's how he still is with everybody. And we're pulling up to the theater, and we're observing that the sidewalks, both sides of the street, are lined with people. And he's pointing it out to me. He's going, Don, look at that. We have a sellout. You know, we sold out the theater. And I look out my window from the back seat of the limo, and there on the marquee of the Alamo Dome, tonight only, the Rolling Stones. And I'm like, Bill. And he looks and, oh no, we're doomed. He wouldn't come out of the green room. He thought, you know, there was no way we were going to compete with the Rolling Stones. Right. So all at once, Starnes, the producer, bursts in through the door, and he goes, "We got to sell out 2,500 people." You know, and Bill, he stands right up, and he goes, "I knew it. I never had any doubt." So wow. The show begins. I'm up on stage, and out of the corner of my eye, I see sitting at the end of the front row, just beaming up at me, so proud, was Bill Shatner. There he was. Okay. So we finished the show that evening. We're backstage. A stagehand comes running up to us. Mr. Shatner, where were you? We were trying to find you." "Well, I was out in the audience. I was listening to Don." "Well, you never guess who was backstage wanting to meet you?" "Well, who? The mayor?" "No, Mick Jagger." So while Shatner was in the front row listening to my talk, the curtain behind me, Jagger was pacing back and forth right behind me as they were trying to find Bill Shatner. So wow. I can honestly state I'm probably the only ufologist in the world that during a presentation on the subject, I was sandwiched between Bill Shatner and Mick Jagger. So,
that's awesome. Yeah, that's amazing.
Huge honor. Wow.
Yeah.
And I have to give you kudos for confronting those Joe Nichols and Schaefer and Klaus.
I enjoy it. I enjoy that because it was something, and you mentioned CUFOS. It's the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies. And J. Allen Hynek will go down as the foremost authority the foremost scientist to ever investigate the phenomenon. 20 years with Project Blue Book, and for all the additional consultation he did with the Air Force, and the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the Spielberg movie, that was also Hynek's movie, and then the founding of the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago. So I was so blessed in having worked with Hynek for the last 8 years of his life. And so not only was he my mentor, my teacher, my dear friend, but he was my scientific director. And I learned so much from him. And one of the things that he drilled into us, and I was one of his special investigators as well, but what he always taught us was, when it's your research, don't ever allow anyone to take it from you. Right. That the moment you start going on the defensive, you've allowed them to control the narrative. You've allowed them essentially steal what you have rightfully earned. I mean, you have done all the spade work. You've separated all the wheat from the chaff, as he used to like this. He would like to say, and don't let them do that. It's yours. They can challenge you. They can question you, but you control the format. You control the debate, and don't let them ever win. And
very sage advice.
And so that's one of the reasons that I've never shied away from such a confrontation, because I think the best thing that I especially have going for me is the fact that I started out as a skeptic. That with Roswell, we were just so absolutely confident that we would make a single weekend jaunt to the land of enchantment and, prove that it was nothing more than a balloon device, as the government still maintains, or something just as prosaic, just as conventional. And here we are all these years later. I've had now 7 best-selling books on the case. I've led now 6 archaeological digs to the crash site, where we're still looking for remnants. We're still looking for physical proof. And we have demonstrated and been able to prove a number of things consistent with the crash. You mentioned the museum. We just had our 5 millionth visitor at the museum.
Wow.
And what I personally most proud of is the fact that we've tracked down and interviewed over 600 witnesses who were either directly or indirectly involved with what happened back in 1947. And down to a man, woman, and child. I don't care if you're talking about a 2-star general. I don't care if you're talking about a 7-year-old child. They all are describing unanimously something extraordinary. They're describing something that is beyond the pale. And for myself, having gone from a skeptic to where I can now say, Don, do you believe? And I'll go, no, I don't believe. I'm convinced.
Yeah.
I'm convinced.
Well,
I've done a full 180. I have no doubt.
It's the case that keeps on giving. It's the biggest in the world. It's undeniable. And I think we still have a lot to learn about it. So
we are still working on it, Preston. We are in the last month. I've tracked down. I've come up with 6 more families whose fathers gave them deathbed confessions about this.
Oh my gosh, that gives me chills.
And so we're now approaching 40 deathbed testimonies, admissible in a court of law. The judicial system has determined that these are physical evidence that people do not lie on their deathbeds. And invariably, they all talk about the highly unusual characteristics of the wreckage, but they also all talk about the bodies. Not just the rumors of the bodies, but that they saw them. They were part of the recovery operation. They helped load them up into the back of the ambulance trucks. They helped assist in their being taken to the base hospital. They loaded them into the crates before they were flown out to destinations unknown, that type of thing.
Well, before we get into all of that, because I can tell you've got a lot to share. Like I said before the show, I'm always very interested in how you got to here from the beginning. When you're born and you're a little kid running around in the backyard and collecting tadpoles or whatever you did.
Right.
What was your journey? Did you believe in UFOs? Have you personally had any encounters? How did you get from there to here?
First of all, I've never had an experience per se. I think we've all seen unusual lights in the sky. We've seen things that at first glance may have looked a little unusual, but welcome to the club. I mean, the nighttime sky, that's a wonderful thing about having grown up in the country, living in rural Wisconsin, that you have a full 360 panoramic view of a nighttime sky. I love it, and I pity those residing in larger cities where they just have no idea because of the light pollution alone, just what is out there. And that is, I think you both would have experienced the taking light amplification or night vision and just looking into the nighttime sky, and it's like pebbles of sand on a beach. I mean, it is just saturated. It is just covered from horizon to horizon. It is unbelievable. And you just walk away with just the awe of this level of human arrogance that, we're it. We're the highest echelon of life throughout, the entire universe. And it's like, stop it. I mean, you'll lose the debate before you even open your mouth, because the only perspective you will have is from maybe the 5th floor of an apartment building in downtown Chicago. And don't tell me you know anything about the universe, let alone, the world itself. And so I spent a lot of time camping as a boy. I was a Cub Scout. I was a Boy Scout. And I just love peering into the nighttime sky. And you just let your imagination just go. Sure. And I grew up with movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still, and Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and Invaders from Mars, and that type of thing. And my favorite UFO movie is still the first Day the Earth Stood Still. And I got to meet and I got to know him very well. And then he personally came to the premiere of our Roswell movie at the Directors Guild in Hollywood. And that was the director of The Day the Earth Stood Still, the late Robert Wise. And the way he took us by the hands backstage, and he just kept, I am so proud of you boys. I am so, and that was coming from Robert Wise. And so, we've managed to impress, or I should say, get the attention of a lot of people in high places. And for that, I also feel very blessed. But getting back to my main impetus, my influence of getting involved with all this, I think any one of us who was alive on November 22nd of 1963, we will never forget where we were, what we were doing, and what our reaction was when we got that first announcement, whether it was in a classroom or in our home or on the road, that the president had just been shot, President John F. Kennedy. And we weren't there. We weren't in Dealey Plaza. We weren't in Dallas. We weren't witness to the event, but it's indelibly etched in our very psyche. We'll never forget. And that's something that I could expand on later in regards to eyewitnesses having faded memories and confusion as they get older. No. I can cite the Kennedy and anyone who remembers 9/11, certainly. Rest of your life, you weren't even in New York, but you will forever remember because it was that unprecedented. It was something that you just will never live beyond. It's like time was frozen at that very moment. So anyway, there was a book that came out, and I was an avid reader from the age of 6. My parents could tell you that with having 5 brothers, no sisters, and making out your Christmas list, what you want from Santa. I always had a list of books.
Well, 5 brothers, really. I'm number 5 of 6 kids too.
I'm the oldest, so yes, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but well, good for you, Preston, because I'm sure just wonderful memories.
Oh yeah.
And, again, it creates such a foundation that of support and love, that no matter what befalls you, no matter what happens in life, you are that solid because of that family, unit. So good for you. But anyway, my parents took me Christmas shopping, and I wanted to go check out the book section of the local department store. And there was a book that on the cover used the very same words that were being bandied about after the Warren Commission's report came out of their investigation of the Kennedy assassination. And there were the words whitewash and cover up. And it wasn't about the Kennedy assassination. It was a book about flying saucers. It was Frank Edwards' book, Flying Saucers, Serious Business.
Love that book. Yep.
And my first.
Wow.
And the chapter, Who's Driving, where it got into the occupant cases. And my second book was Coral and Jim Lorenzen's book, Flying Saucer Occupants. Which was, and then being up at Pelican Lake in northern Wisconsin, Dolly.
Pelican Lake, oh my God.
And
That's
reading
where my father
that
had his
book
first encounter.
out on the pier
Okay.
after dark with a flashlight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it just, I was hooked. I was hooked forever, because it was like the late Princely Lepore's book, The Flying Saucer Story. And in his opening introduction was, welcome to the Flying Saucer Story, the greatest story of all time.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, I would say the greatest story in the last 1,000 years in the millennium.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's like, how can people ignore this? How can the media not be totally captivated by the idea that we're talking about the biggest story of the millennium?
Wow.
And
so you were pretty young when you started reading about this. Wow. That's amazing.
And I've never looked back. I got away with murder through high school because I was doing term papers, and I was getting up in speech class, and I was able to give a talk on UFOs without so much as a note card, because I already knew the cases. I knew this. And then from there, I was corresponding with people working in the field, and they assisted me in becoming involved. And I would then get into investigative training through college with the Area Phenomena Research Organization. And what helped was the fact that the founders, who I really originally mentioned as the authors of that second book, Flying Saucer Occupants, that I had read, were Coral and Jim Lorenzen, and they were originally from Door County, Wisconsin, which is where APRO was originally founded. Yeah. So they took me under their wing in that regard.
Wow.
And I was being assigned as even a field trainee cases, and Dr. Jalen Hynek happened to come across one of my case reports. And so I'm graduating from college, and Hynek invites me to his home in Evanston, Illinois. And there he was head of the astronomy department at Northwestern. And I sat down with him, and he told me right to my face that I'm very impressed with your work, Don. And how would you like to work with us? And one thing leading to another, and then there was a handful of us that actually would become his special investigators. We were his boys, as he would call us. My boys. Do
you remember your first case, just out of curiosity?
Yes, there was a case in Cedarburg, Wisconsin. Huh. And it was involved a family, a mother and her two children. And it was near the overpass of Highway 43, late at night. And it was like a cooking wok, flat on the bottom and domed on top. And then it had a bit of a tail, but no wings, no propulsion, and it was lit up like a Christmas tree.
Wow.
And the fact that we were able to go back to the scene of the crime, as I like to describe it, and Hynek was impressed by the case. He was impressed enough that he wrote it up in the International UFO Reporter, which was the official publication of the Center for UFO Studies. And just one thing leading to another, and it got to the point that he was, I was going down to the CUFOS office on the average twice a week, and we were talking over the phone on a regular basis, discussing cases. And at one point, CUFOS put together an investigator's test to demonstrate as far as where investigators needed more training, more work, more experience. And I'll never forget, I was down after a board meeting at CUFOS at the Hynek residence, and the late John Timmerman was our treasurer. And we're all there afterwards and just before dinner. And John Timmerman would say to Dr. Hynek, you didn't have Don take the test. Why is that? And Alan laughed and he goes, he could test me. And I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, talk about now having to really step up my work because I have the foremost authority saying, you know, he could test me. So, but getting back to even Close Encounters, Dr. Hynek, who had consulted, he was the tech advisor on the film.
Right.
And they had just filmed his cameo where they're at Devil's Tower on the dark side of Devil's Tower. And so we had a dinner party, a celebration when he returned. And we had dined, and I was in the kitchen with Dr. Hynek. And so I said to him, I commented, so I suppose, Alan, Close Encounters now is your favorite UFO movie. To which he smiled and he went, no, Don, I still agree with you. It's still the day the Earth stood still.
Wow.
So, as a matter of fact, Dr. Jalen Hynek's favorite UFO movie was The Day the Earth Stood Still.
I'll put Close Encounters there in the top 5 for sure.
I would too, certainly. But that we still Day the Earth Stood Still.
Wow. Yeah, the remake, don't bother.
No, don't even bother. Don't even bother. Yeah.
It's like, why would you even try to remake that?
Well, and you know, without getting into, you know, the theme of the movie, the idea that back then with the Cold War and the very thought that as we were experimenting with rockets and the thought that we could launch nuclear warheads on rockets, and for the first time, we literally did become a threat off the planet. And so the very premise that we would be visited and we would be warned, you better start behaving down here, otherwise we will exterminate you, we will eliminate you, because now you're starting to concern us. The remake and the thought that why should they care if we destroy ourselves by polluting our environment?
Exactly.
How does that become a threat to them? I mean, it just was a non-starter. It made absolutely no sense. And you're absolutely right, Preston. Why would you even bother to make a remake?
Yeah, it's a classic.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, you know, getting back to the whole theme of this show, Roswell and UFO crashes, that was, you know, this is a field that's experienced a lot of skepticism in terms of even UFO occupants. People didn't want to touch that. And of course, UFO crashes was anathema. I mean, no taboo.
Totally.
And what was it? Scully, his book was panned and debunked and attacked. And then I guess it was Stringfield. And Leonard Stringfield
in 78, yes.
And even then, it was an uphill battle for him.
It was, but he became a magnet. And we dedicated one of our books to Len because not only was he a dear friend, but a colleague who shared a lot of his confidential inside information with us, because that's one of the reasons, and I think if you were to look into his background, that he would gain the confidence of so many of these potential whistleblowers who are talking about all of these alleged retrievals, not only throughout America and Canada and Mexico, but even throughout the world.
Yep.
But mainly because Len was such a gentleman in honoring their confidentiality that he did not reveal, even to his closest allies and colleagues in the field, the names of these people. So much so that Dr. Hynek was constantly trying to get Len to even give him a name, a sampling, someone that he could, go and talk to as a third party and see if the story could be confirmed, see if we could come up with additional names, see if it might be something that we've heard about from another source. And what wonderful corroboration. We now have two witnesses to the same event. And so, I believe that most of your audience, and I would suggest most of our colleagues in ufology, aren't even aware of the fact that Dr. Hynek, and for all of his failed attempts to get Stringfield to share all this confidential information, that Dr. Hynek finally would pose the question, what if I were to bring in someone that is someone just beyond approach, someone who just by his credentials, by his reputation, I mean, not only that he's a national hero, but that there would be no way that the skeptics could attack him in any way, and that witnesses would feel very comfortable, very confident in working with this individual. And that individual was none other than Neil Armstrong.
That's a big one.
Apollo 11, first man on the moon. And Armstrong, I mean, Dr. Hynek just didn't put that name out there. He just didn't throw it out there. It was because Armstrong had agreed. Armstrong was teaching at that time at the University of Ohio in Cincinnati. And so he had agreed. He was already willing to tackle the possibility. And we all know the rumors of supposedly what they saw on the moon and supposed comments that were made, on the part of Armstrong that, well, we're not alone here. There's somebody, that type of thing. And we've heard these stories for years. Well, the irony is that here was Armstrong actually wanting to jump into the idea that it's beyond just, we know of a presence, we're aware of their being there, but we have their technology, we have the hardware, and there have been efforts to reverse engineer it, and that he wanted to be part of that. He wanted to crack, that ultimate mystery, and it didn't happen. It still didn't happen. Armstrong would get transferred to a consulting job in, I believe it was Iowa, shortly thereafter, and so he jumped into that new occupation with both feet, and it was a wasted opportunity. But I would have been part of that, and we'll never see anything like that again, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, I wrote to Leonard Stringfield, and he was very kind. He responded, autographed one of his status reports for me. And I knew right then and there, this is a forefront of UFO research. Why isn't it being taken more seriously? Because when I got involved in this field in '86, I'm a relative latecomer. And even back then, there weren't a whole lot of books out there. I found Lorenzens, of course, and Fowler and Edwards. And
you're absolutely right, Preston. There were times, and as a young boy, and as I described, that I was always scoping out the bookstores. Mom and Dad would take me shopping. It's like, you got to take me to Walden Books. You got to take me as far as to Dalton Books, whatever it was called back then, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And there were years that you could not find a UFO / flying saucer book on the shelves. There was, that roller coaster where the interest would just ebb and flow, and at times it was at rock bottom until someone would break through with, once again, something that would raise the story to the next level. And that's where, like, as we got more and more into missing time and abduction scenarios, that type of thing. And especially like with Len, as far as with the whole idea that there have been crashes, there have been crash recoveries, there have been retrieval operations, and Roswell again being the granddaddy of them all.
Yeah, there was of course the little thin book, the first one on Roswell by Moore, and
Charles Berlitz and William Moore, correct?
Yeah.
Roswell Incident,
which was
1980.
basically thanks to Friedman, right? Stan Friedman.
Right. Stan did most of the research on that book, and Berlitz did most of the writing, if not all the writing. But it really did not even attract. And Kevin Randall, who I was working with at that time, neither one of us had even read the book. And when we made our first trip down to New Mexico in February of 1989, we had to go find copies of the book, for no other reason than it provided us with a roadmap. It provided a lot of names. I believe that there were 92 witnesses described at that time, and a good many of them still alive. So we could follow in their footsteps. We could re-interview these people. And but I can honestly state to both of you, after we had finished that trip, it was like, we can't get back down there fast enough. Because as we were talking to more and more first-hand witnesses who were describing the wreckage, and they were describing that memory material, this material that was practically indestructible, but the memory material specifically that you could fold, you could crease, you could crumble into a ball, and each and every time you would place it down, it would unfurl. It would unravel. It would flow like water as it would smooth out to its original shape and size. And we're looking at one another, hearing this over and over again. It's like this material possessed perfect memory. It was memory material.
Yeah.
And especially back then, it was nothing we had. We weren't even close to that back then.
It was artificial skin for the
And
craft.
it's interesting you mentioned that, Dolly. Within weeks after Roswell, and knowing by all the eyewitness testimony, and because we had done the book on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which was a predecessor to Area 51. 51 wouldn't even come into existence until 8 years later in 1955.
Yeah.
So Wright-Pat had the Foreign Technology Division. If you so much as had a recovered Russian MiG fighter, or all the hardware from the Nazi Germany post World War II, Imperial Japan, it all went to Wright-Pat for analysis and breakdown. Let's see if they've advanced the technology to any degree, and is it anything that we can glean any knowledge from? Well, wouldn't you know it, that you had the crash of a craft of unknown origin, and it too, the wreckage, the remains of the craft, all went to Wright-Pat in Dayton, Ohio. And so within weeks after the incident, Wright-Pat contracts Battelle Institute, one of the major national laboratories in the world at that time. It's just down the road from Dayton. It's in Columbus, Ohio. And the assignment for the project was the creation of self-healing metal. So when you mention skin,
Right. Yeah.
self-healing, yeah. So that they would have used that term. And the reason I'm using that term is because we managed to get a copy of the second progress report on the project, which came out in 1949. Well, we're still trying to get a copy of the first one that came out in 1948, a year after they started the project. But there it is. It is spelled out. Self-healing metal. What else are they talking about? So I think we all reach a stage in our lives. We reach an age where we no longer believe in coincidence.
Right.
We realize that, a lot of things are
connecting dots. Right. You're cognitive enough to connect the dots. That's right.
Correct.
Well, I know you've got volumes of information, but for those who haven't heard of Roswell and have clearly been living under a rock, if they haven't, can you give us a quick rundown of what? Sure.
Well, I always start by just giving a little background of even the people involved and New Mexico. And very often, especially when I lecture on college campus, I will pose the question, especially if the faculty are present. I'll ask, now, where was the first atomic bomb detonated? And you'll be amazed at how often, the learned professors will, well, of course, Japan. Well, how about 2 hours west of Roswell? Trinity Site, July of 1945. I mean, that's what the Oppenheimer movie was all about last year. And I couldn't recommend the movie more highly. And I was correct when I said, when I saw it, this has Oscar written all over it, and it did. It was Picture of the Year. So I highly, as a matter of historic fact, go see the movie. But so you had the first detonation of an atomic bomb in New Mexico, and then you had ongoing atomic research at Los Alamos, New Mexico, and then you had all the testing of the recovered German V-2 rockets post-World War II at the White Sands Proving Grounds in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And then at Roswell, you had just south of town, the Roswell Army Airfield, the first atomic bomb squadron in the world. They were the elite within the military at that time, where they hand-selected the best officers, the best pilots, crew, doctors, nurses, all stationed at that one base in July of 1947. In fact, the two B-29 bombers, which had ended World War II, had dropped the two atomic bombs, Little Boy and Fat Man, which were the Enola Gay and Boxcar. They were hangared at Roswell. So they were right there. So the irony, again, that this all happened essentially all within one region, one area. So I had mentioned Project Blue Book in regards to Dr. Hynek, which was the most famous of the three official Air Force investigations of the UFO phenomenon. And according to Blue Book, there were more UFO sightings in New Mexico than anywhere else in the country at that time. It was as though someone else was very interested in our military potential. Yeah. And what better place?
White Sands was a UFO magnet.
New Mexico was a UFO magnet. Yeah. No question. So, late evening of July 2nd, 1947, severe lightning storm in the high desert of Lincoln County, New Mexico. Ranchers would describe that between the thunderclaps, they heard what sounded like an explosion. The next morning, a ranch foreman by the name of W.W. Brazo discovers a debris field, a huge debris field of the strangest material that neither he or the ranchers, even a state police officer, could identify. So that's Sunday, July 6th. He loaded up boxes of this bizarre material, the back of his pickup truck, made the 75-mile drive into Roswell, but he doesn't report it to the military. He goes to the courthouse. It's the sheriff. And it was Sheriff George Wilcox who then notified the base.
Yeah, and he knows it's not a balloon at this point because he's seen those, right?
Exactly. Well, nobody is identifying this as a balloon or anything conventional. Again, no one has ever seen anything like this. So it's the very head of intelligence, Major Jesse Marcel of the 509th Bomb Wing, who retrieves a box of the wreckage from the sheriff's office, takes it back to the base. And we need to keep in mind that back then, this was a 4th of July holiday weekend. Most of the base personnel were home on leave. Nothing was being tested. Nothing was reported missing. Skies were clear. All was quiet. So what does this represent? And then the very base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, he is immediately alerted. So you can see that it is rising in importance. That now we have the very base commander also involved, and he too has no idea what this material is from. It's clearly not from any form of balloon, but it's not from a plane. It's not from a rocket. It's not from anything that they are aware of.
Right, and this is just this memory metal, the I-beams.
I-beams, the fiber optics,
right,
and the material that was practically indestructible. So, do we need to break for the top of the hour now, or should we?
Yeah, sure, we can do that.
And then we'll just quickly continue.
Thanks, Don. All right, you guys, thank you. We are watching The Light Gate. This is episode 50. I'm your host, Preston Dennett. My lovely co-host is Dolly Saffron. Our guest tonight is Donald R. Schmitt, author and researcher specializing largely in Roswell, but really has done quite a bit more than that. And just so you know, we are streaming live on 107.7 at the United Public Radio Network. This is in the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana. Also at the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3. We're on Roku. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. So huge thanks to all the people involved in making this show. Really appreciate that. And we've covered quite a bit of subjects already. We've talked about Donald's entrance into the field. How as a young kid, he started buying UFO books and really became interested in this subject. Joined CUFOS, the Center for UFO Studies, befriended Jalen Hynek, and some really interesting stories about Bill Shatner and Mick Jagger. And we've just begun to really even look at Roswell. I don't know how we're going to get all this information out that you have, but let's do our best.
I have a question. Did any of them mention how heavy this metal was and stuff, debris that they were picking up? Was it heavy?
They all described it as being practically weightless.
That's right. Okay.
That it felt as though you weren't even holding anything in your hands.
Right.
And that it was paper thin, and that they even had a hard time describing the material. They would refer to it as metal-like,
Right.
but it wasn't metal. It was plastic-like, but it wasn't plastic. So there too, it was a new material. It was a new alloy, a new composite, something that they couldn't put words to, and also again demonstrate just how unprecedented that. Like Marcel, who was the head of intelligence, and that would have made him the #1 intelligence officer in the country at that time.
Yeah.
And before he died, when he would state that, and I'll quote him, being familiar with all materials, as you just mentioned, Dolly, being familiar with all materials, both foreign and domestic, this was nothing made on this earth. End quote. So that was the only explanation they were left with. You know, how much more profound, how much more direct you get. You know, it wasn't made on this earth. It wasn't like it could have been, or it resembled something of a higher intelligence, higher intellect. No, it was not made on this earth.
So they had pretty much concluded it wasn't Russian or Chinese or German at this point.
Well, even Colonel Blanchard, the base commander, he would say afterwards that because we couldn't identify it domestically as being one of our own, that we felt it had to be Russian. But then the moment we started handling it, we realized, God help us if it is, because this is so superior to any of our materials. And he said, but they quickly realized, no, it wasn't from here. It was
When it had
not
any markings on it, Russia marks everything. They let you know it's theirs.
That's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. So,
all right. So moving on, Colonel Blanchard,
So Blanchard, he would then. Now, I want your audience to realize too that if it's just a case of going to check out some strange material, just humor the rancher for that matter. Yeah, just go along with him and go check it out. You send out a couple of enlisted men, a couple grunts, as they would be called. Just go check it out and report back to me when you arrive back at the base. No, he sends out Marcel, the head of intelligence, and the head of counterintelligence, Captain Sheridan Cabot, already suggesting that it may be something foreign, because that would be Cabot's specialty. He's the head of counterintelligence. So you're sending out your two lead intelligence officers to go and investigate this. And so it's the next day that the officers, they would fill up 2 entire vehicles with the wreckage, which I should point out covered an area, based on all the eyewitness accounts, of almost a mile in length. That the wreckage covered that vast an area.
Which a mogul balloon can't do, by the way.
No, a mogul balloon is about 600 feet. That's
It takes an object to break up like that and at speeds big enough for them to travel the distance. So when you look at it, you can almost estimate how fast it was coming in, how it came the first time, and then bam, 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 all the way down the line.
One of the things that Marcel quickly described was that when they first arrived at the debris field, and the way the material, the pattern, the way it was fanned out from an upper pinnacle from the northwest to the southeast, and then extending, as I'd mentioned, almost a mile, that it was clearly a mid-air explosion. That whether it was struck by lightning, and we have verified the weather, the severe weather at that very evening.
Would you like to know why?
Through the Stallion Weather Network service. And that precisely between 11:30 that evening, that off of the southern Capitan Mountains, that a severe storm came off of that mountain ridge. And because it's high desert, the lightning strikes the ground because of the elevation.
Well, Socorro is one of the lightning capitals of the United States.
Exactly, just to the west. Right. And I've been witness to the fact that as we have just raced to get out of there when some of these storms have just come up within a half an hour, and to see the lightning strike on the hillsides around you. And due to the drought conditions, the entire, hill just immediately engulfed in flames, and speeding up even faster just for your lives, trying to get away as you quickly could.
So Dolly, what you were jumping in there? What do you think made it crash?
Would you like to know the physical anomaly that caused that crash? And this is well-documented science, so let's just put it out there.
From the ET as well?
It's happening now. So also, our magnetosphere started going down in 1859. Okay, we had the Carrington event, and our poles were in the beginning of a change at that time, and our magnetosphere is in bad situation with that because we lose cohesion with it as it progresses, and it progresses rapidly. It was slowly at first, and it's exponentially getting worse right now. Our sun is in circuit, electromagnetic circuit with the planet. Storms can come up from that circuit. If the sun expresses a solar hole in it, and you get the stream of energy coming from it, or a CME, or even just an explosion on the sun, it all goes to Earth. If it's Earth facing, it'll hit us. The Earth absorbs that energy, and then it circuits back up. Roswell, New Mexico is one of those places where it's easily charged to the sun. It's one of the focal points of charging to the sun. It is a release point, in other words. What hit that craft was the charge coming back up, not lightning coming down. It was ground to ceiling energy, lightning coming up. A craft can take lightning hitting it any day of the week, but it's the electromagnetic field guideline that moved suddenly, left it without cohesion, and then the ground to ceiling energy burst, and it's 10 times more than a lightning strike down. It can blow anything at that point. Hit it, and it went down. That's what did it.
I love this, Dolly, because most people are not aware of the fact that lightning in a bad storm can also come from the ground up.
Right, it's charging from the ground.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's something that we have also looked into. But just to add another element, I had the good fortune of interviewing a former radar specialist with the CIA, and he was an electronics engineer. And he had suggested to me, and we were aware of this, that radar was in its infancy at that time.
Right.
And White Sands had the most sophisticated radar facility in the world. Right. And mainly because of not only Trinity, but because of all the rocket testing that they were conducting post-World War II. So they were able to track both incoming and outgoing. Right. All other facilities at that time were only able to track incoming aircraft.
Right.
Now, because there were no regulations on the frequencies, the power that was being transmitted by these radar systems.
Right. They were crazy. Right.
That it was creating, and then especially within a lightning storm, which would either supercharge these frequencies, make them even more erratic, unpredictable, and less stable. And because we had a facility, as I mentioned, in White Sands, you had radar in Roswell, you had radar in Cannon, as far as at another base to the northeast of Roswell. You had another radar facility in Albuquerque at Kirtland. You had another facility in Vaughan, 93 miles northwest of Roswell, and then just north of White Sands, in conjunction with all the rocket testing, just south of Socorro, which you had mentioned, Preston, there was another facility. Now, these are radar lobes that are projected that from, and then directly straight up. But as we've often heard described, that planes would try to fly under the radar. Well, it was just a matter of flying under those radar lobes, okay? But anyway, they would intersect that from all these different facilities. And where did they happen to all intersect?
Right.
In Lincoln County, exactly where the crash took place.
Yeah.
And so one could
I want you to consider one more thing, okay? Because I know exactly what you're talking about. This is where the idea for scalar weaponry came from, by the way. This is a fact that did happen, but it would have lightning from the ground up would have punched them down to nothing. It would have hurt them, okay? And you have no proof whatsoever, and you need to try to get it, I'm telling you so, of how many of those radars got hit at the same time that happened to that craft.
We don't, but you're correct, yes.
Okay. Yeah. If you did have that information, you would find out that it put them out. It put them out because a ground up would have knocked them all out. And it has happened then and since. That's one of the vulnerabilities of those radar. They can't Faraday them at all. And anything ground up will get rid of them. You also have to understand that those craft have the ability to EMP any electrical activity below them, right? And it would have been on, and they would have been monitoring that. So when I tell you that the electromagnetic field line moved because that punch of energy came up and it slew it over, they lost control, they lost their environment, and it went right through them. There were two, by the way. There was that one and another one. And
I wanted to ask you about that as well.
There was another one, and that one was not as badly damaged as that one. It was a little bit further out, and it didn't take the full brunt of that energy burst. But I would love for the government to cough up that information, because anybody, any scientist, any physicist, anybody who has any idea how this all works, that's the first question in their mind. If you're going to blame a scalar event on something, tell me whether those radars were on and functioning or not, and why. See what I'm saying? And they've never mentioned it. They don't talk about it, and there's a reason why, because they weren't working.
And Dolly, I'm glad you used the word Faraday, as we hear more and more in regards to the, just the chance of an EMP attack.
Right.
that it would neutralize our electric grid.
Your entire grid. That's right.
Right, grid.
It
And
can knock them out temporarily as well and let them come back. It just depends on the power.
a Faraday, system would protect, would support, as far as they're coming up as far as with conductive materials that you could put over your car in the event, and at least your car would run after, such a situation.
Certain type of plastics can become a Faraday cage. If you use plastics, then electronic reworking where the energy is going to go to. Yeah, you can Faraday that way, but it's not permanent. It depends on the size of the impulse. In other words, some of them are so large. I mean, if you got an X-class scale to the 12th, it's going to fry anything. It don't matter what you Faraday at that point, it's going to eat it. And that's one of the things that they don't tell people either, that they know this for a fact. And that's why they've gone so deep underground, because they're trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Say, how can a UFO possibly crash if they're so advanced?
Everything breaks. I can tell you, there's boo-boos everywhere. And there's no civilization in this universe that doesn't have a bad day. That's a fact. Yeah.
And it speaks of the nuts and bolts, the idea that something that is manufactured, something that is assembled, it can be disassembled.
Correct.
And whether, just not being caught in a situation, as I had described, that those storms would come up so quickly.
Yeah.
And that they were unable to, flee the area before something catastrophic took place.
That's right.
And it was catastrophic by the extent of the debris, the fact that there were even a number of bodies that were located 2.5 miles from the debris field, suggesting that they had either been sucked out by the percussion of the explosion or the decompression. We don't know, but that there was a cabin, a pod, that still continued on for another 25, 27 miles before impacting 35 miles north of Roswell. And that's where 2 additional bodies and a survivor.
That pod. Yeah, the driver of the pod would have been in that pod.
So do you think there were 2 craft? Did you have evidence of that?
We have personally spent more time in the Socorro area, west of Socorro, Magdalena, Datto, Horse Springs. For every rumor, every talk of something happening out on the plains of San Augustine, as the Moore Berlitz book had suggested back in 1980. And what we have been able to determine is that there was a plane crash that happened in the summer of 1945. It was a transport plane, and that wreckage was scattered for a mile. Bodies were scattered throughout the area. The area was cordoned off. There was an extensive recovery operation that took place. And then tying that in with the fact that each and every time there was a scheduled rocket launch from White Sands, they would evacuate all the ranchers through that area, and they would put them up in a motel in Socorro. With no explanation as to what was going on, because it was all top secret. And then we had also discovered, because the asphalt was still all crushed and in mounds at the site, that there was also a radar facility just south of Socorro. And so the military was constantly coming in and out of that area. And so that all fueled that legend, that idea that there was a crash. Why was the military, constantly coming in to the region? Why was there such a recovery operation involving the military, that type of thing? And we have never been able to come up with a solid witness to suggest that anything beyond that plane crash has taken place out in that region.
So how much credence do you place on, was it Jim and Trudy Ragsdale or Barney Barnett? Or because there's a lot of characters who are coming in here and making all kinds of claims.
Barney Barnett, we had interviewed his wife, and we had interviewed his niece, who had kept a diary from her aunt. And so the diary covered that entire period, June, July, August, that whole summer. And there was absolutely no mention, and the fact that there was no mention of his working out in that region during that time. He was a civil engineer. He worked for the government.
Right.
He was, and so we had our fingers crossed, believe me, both of you. We were so hoping that we would have written documentation that something actually strange had happened and that Barney's wife had entered it in the diary, and it wasn't to be found.
Was Dr. Hynek aware of other types of UFO sightings that involved crashes or landings around Roswell? So he knew what was going on, right? Okay.
Well, what's interesting, Dolly, is that we were not aware until after Dr. Hynek passed away, and going through all of his personal effects, all his personal files, that when he had moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, in the last 2 years of his life, and when he had retired from Northwestern University, they had willed him an abandoned observatory in the Truth or Consequences area of New Mexico. Well, once he had moved to Scottsdale, it was he and a former student by the name of Elaine Hendry that they would go over and they would, work on, refurbishing and see if they could bring, that abandoned building back up to operation. What we were not aware of was the fact that he was going on further east. He was going into Lincoln County. He was going into Corona. He was talking to all these people that were named in the chart in the Berlitz Moore book, who still resided in that region, and he was with his own handwritten notes, writing down, their answers to his questions about the crash. And at the top of the page, this needs to be investigated, that type of thing. So there was Dr. J. Allen Hynek posthumously telling us, go get him. Investigate this. Finish what I had started. And, so in many ways, we are finishing what J. Allen Hynek had started.
Good.
But he was clearly looking into Roswell.
Yeah.
We have documents that prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt.
So what about the memo where they said, okay, we found it. And they told the world and then they pulled it back.
Right.
God, if they had not pulled it back, what a different world we'd be living in.
Well, I mean, the fact that on July 8th, Tuesday, July 8th of 1947, the Roswell Army Airfield put out a press release stating that they had captured a flying saucer. I mean, they just flatly stated. In other words, the first atomic bomb squadron in the world is actually admitting we got one. We have a flying saucer in our possession.
Was that Colonel Blanchard who did that?
Yes. But I need to point out to both of you that just redressing for a moment, when the ranch foreman, Brazel, first came in the town, that was mid-morning, Sunday, July 8th, when Blanchard had sent Marcel, head of intelligence, and Cabot, head of counterintelligence, to go investigate. Blanchard immediately got on the horn. He got on the phone to call his boss, who was General Roger Ramey, head of the 8th Air Force, headquartered at Carswell Army Airfield in Fort Worth, Texas. Now, Ramey was in Denton, Texas. He wasn't at the base. He was there for a plane dedication and with his family for the July weekend. So Blanchard would speak with General Ramey's chief of staff, who was Colonel Thomas J. DuBose, who we interviewed and we got a sworn affidavit from. Wow. DuBose would retire a brigadier general. Brigadier general telling us, what he firsthand witnessed. So anyway,
how are all these
the
people
Bose-
talking? I mean, aren't they under any kind of NDA?
well, this was again at the end of his life.
All right.
And their attitude was originally a non-disclosure statement is for 25 years.
All right.
It's not for a lifetime. And a lot of times they would be reminded, well, we're going to extend it, that it's going to go for another 25. We see that with the Kennedy assassination, that every time another 25 years elapse, they say, well, we're going to extend it another period of time. Most recent during the Trump administration, that we were hoping that more details would be released, more documents, and they once again, the CIA, no, we cannot disclose, we cannot release these documents. Okay, so much for those of us who believe there is much more to it than just a lone assassin. But anyway, DuBose would then contact the Pentagon. And he leaves word of what he has just been informed of from the base commander of the first atomic bomb squadron in the world, Colonel William Blanchard. And within minutes, who should call DuBose back but the deputy commander of Strategic Air Command, General Clements McMullen, ordering him to contact Blanchard and have them immediately have some of the wreckage flown through Fort Worth, Carswell Army Airfield, and at the very base commander there, Al Clark, would then assume possession of the wreckage and fly it directly to Washington to the Pentagon. The point I'm making, you two, is that Washington already had the wreckage in hand by late Sunday evening, July 6th.
No doubt about it. Yeah.
The point is, the press release doesn't go out until Tuesday at noon,
Right.
July 8th.
Yeah, so they knew.
So
Yeah.
it wasn't just Blanchard putting out the press release. Washington was also fully involved.
Oh, God, we're so close.
I have a question.
Infuriating.
There is this concerns me because if you know anything about radiation, you know that these craft are radioactive, and all those little pieces are going to be highly radioactive. I also know the Army well enough to know that they all had bloody Geiger counters in their hands out there.
Yes.
So were they? How aware were they to be very careful with it and treat it like hazmat? I mean,
They were. And
Okay.
in fact, Marcel would describe that one of the first things they did was check. The rancher had stored the largest piece of it in a livestock shed
Oh God.
next to a one-room shack. It was called the Heinz House,
Hmm.
which is where the two officers and Brazel stayed the night before they went to actually start the recovery of loading up all that wreckage. And Marcel went out with a Geiger counter and checked it for radiation. It was minimal at best. So already we were starting to think, now, are we talking now about an atmospheric craft, a scout craft, something that is launched from, say, a mothership, something else? So as a result, it would not be radioactive in the sense that it would come through the radiation belt and be highly radioactive.
There are two fields of radiation on a craft. On the inside, there's none.
Mhm.
On the outside of it, oh boy, is there ever. Okay.
Right.
And it's a particular type of radiation and it has a signature that they all well know now. Okay. It's not like your x-ray that you get. Okay.
Right.
And if the type of debris that they were encountering, that's interesting to me because the skin of it would have been in a field that protected it. That's why I wanted to know. And the reason I wanted to know that was I'm confirming it to myself that you all did what you did and you knew what you were doing. And that's good.
Yes.
Okay.
And no radiation that was of any concern. In fact, for all the men who were part of the recovery, and we were talking dozens of witnesses who we tracked down, and as they would describe, even being shoulder to shoulder on their hands and knees, picking up every last shard of this. What spooked them the most, what frightened them the most, wasn't that it was radioactive. because they weren't even wearing gloves. They were not wearing any form of, what we would call a hazmat, any form of protection back then. But the fact that they saw this for being as strange as it was, and they felt that they were being contaminated. They felt that they were handling something that would at some point make them extremely ill, that they were just the guinea pigs out there doing, all the dirty work.
So did you ever find witnesses who were just too scared to talk?
Oh, yes. Many times, Preston, that they were just too scared, too reluctant. One of the witnesses to the survivor was the late Elazar Benavides. And it took us the better part of 2 years to get him to talk. And it was his wife who described to us that she was first informed of his experience within a year after they married. And they married 2 years after the incident.
Wow.
So she's hearing about this back in 1949. And he was assigned guard duty at Hangar P3, it's called now Building 84. It's where all the wreckage and the craft and the remains transited through. It's where everything was stored before it was all crated, boxed up, and shipped out. And his story was that they were called in to relieve another group of military police. And they were posted behind an ambulance truck. And there were the configuration, what he thought at first were children under sheets on these gurneys, a number of them within this hangar. And they were loaded, they were instructed to load them into the back of this ambulance truck. And one of the men stepped on the draping sheet, which pulled it free. And there he was within 6 inches of his face.
Wow.
And the eyes open. And he is staring eye to eye as far as with this, as he called it, this species.
Yeah.
And so his wife would describe to us that they were unable to sleep in the same bedroom for 40 years because he would jolt up in bed night after night after night, screaming out, yelling out that he just could not ever remove that image, that face from his memory.
Wow.
And so
Man.
she was pleading with us, is there anything you can do to relieve him of that anxiety, of that fear, of that mental anguish, that type of thing? And we will never forget the first time that he opened up and he wept like a child. I mean, he just, in his hands, and the tears running between his fingers, and he just cried and cried and cried, and he just, you won't believe what I saw. You won't believe what I saw. And he described what I just mentioned.
Man, oh man.
And so, how do you call these people liars? How do you, and it's not like he was writing a book. It's not like he wouldn't even allow us to use his real name. We had to use a pseudonym when we first told the story.
Tom is asking, was this filmed?
Oh, it was all audio taped.
Oh, all right.
Because we have videotaped where we have been able to. Benavides would allow us to videotape in interviews thereafter, so we do have him on film. But we have always respected, again, the confidentiality of the witnesses because we've always been looking for the information, not anything that would intrude or invade or violate their privacy.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, and realizing too that, as you had mentioned, Preston, that these men were all sworn to secrecy. Very often, am I going to get in trouble if I talk to you? Am I going to lose my pension, my benefits if I talk to you guys? And what was so amusing is that in September of 1994, when it was Colonel Richard Weaver, who I know personally, I know very well. And they came out with the third official explanation on Roswell, and that being Project Mogul, which you had mentioned earlier. Same type of balloon, same materials, but that it was part of a Russian spy program with an acoustic listening device. The thought being that when the Soviets were to detonate their first atomic bomb, which they would in August of 1949, that we would pick up the shock wave in the upper atmosphere. Well, the project failed miserably. Mogul did not detect the first Soviet bomb. It failed. But nonetheless, that at the same time that Mogul was presented as a new theory, it was the Secretary of the Air Force, Sheila Windhall, who put out a statement, and they put out an official release on the part of the Air Force that all Air Force personnel were hereby free to talk about their involvement in the Roswell incident in 1947. Whew. Okay. So nobody picked up on what we immediately did. I mean, there was a room full of reporters at the Pentagon press room. And, all the witnesses, I mean, it clearly proves that we're not hiding anything because we're telling all Air Force personnel that they can now openly discuss this. Well, what nobody picked up on was the fact that there was no Air Force in July of 1947.
Thank you.
This was an Army incident. How does the Air Force absolve the Army of anything?
Thank you. I was waiting for that.
It was a red herring. It was like, how dare you? And the joke was that whenever we would show this to witnesses thereafter, one of them even tore it up and said, they think we're that stupid?
Yes.
And it's like, well, yeah, they do. And they think that the American public is that stupid. And they certainly think the American media is that stupid because there wasn't a single reporter in the room that went, wait a minute. There was no Air Force at the time of the Roswell incident.
Wow.
Yeah, I get messages about Wright Pat because it's Air Force now, but it was Army when this all happened.
Right field. It was right field, correct.
Yeah.
Army Air Corps, correct.
They get a little violent about it sometimes too. I mean, wordy even. It's like, no.
But there's a clear distinction. That's the point. That Roswell Army Airfield in July of 47, Wright Field in July of 47. It was in January of 48 when they were able to switch off and they could stay either with the Army or now become part of the new United States Air Force. Wright Field became Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Roswell Army Airfield became Walker Air Force Base. So, but again, it's a matter of historic record.
Right.
Just knowing your history.
Oh, can we pop up a few questions from chat before it gets
please.
too late? Because Mike is asking, can you elaborate on why Marcel would have been the top intelligence officer?
Well, because the 509th, because it was a composite unit where they selected the first people to be in charge of the atomic bomb. As I mentioned earlier, where they selected the best officers, pilots, crew. If you swept a broom on that base back in 1947, it was because you were the best sweeper in the entire U.S. military. you all had a top security clearance for the atomic bomb. Now, Major Jesse Marcel was the head of intelligence of the 509th. He had a top security clearance for the atomic bomb. And in that capacity, that would have made him the lead intel officer in the entire U.S. military at that time.
Okay, now someone else is bringing up, and this is a question I wanted to ask Colonel Corso and his claims of reverse engineering. What?
I had met the late Colonel Philip Corso on 2 occasions, so I got to interview him extensively, and I found that what he knew firsthand, but that he was constantly having to fill in because he was not stationed. He was at Fort Riley in Kansas City when this happened, and then he would claim that he saw things that came through in a truck, not on a plane, as they were as far as transporting materials and bodies off the base at Roswell at that time. Now, Corso did not write the book. It was written by Dr. William Burns. I know Bill very well. I consider him a good friend. But it's a huge book. I mean, I would have a hard time. I mean, I've written individual chapters about Major Jesse Marcel and about other witnesses involved. But the idea that I could write a whole book about Jesse Marcel, no, I would have to add a lot of padding, a lot of fluff. Mm-hmm. And I'm afraid that's what most of that book is, because all of the quotes, the conversations going back and forth between the principal witnesses at Roswell are all fabricated. They never happened. It was just, it's a novel. It's just recreating what Bill Burns, envisioned the conversation would have involved at the time as they were part of this recovery operation. Now, one of our star witnesses for our second book was the late Frank Kaufman. And Kaufman would have claimed that he was part of the Nine, which was part of a recovery team. And a good number of them from off of the base at Roswell who arrived, and Kaufman was then assigned to be part of the retrieval, and that he would see everything from the remains of the craft to the bodies involved. Now, as we started to doubt Kaufman's testimony more and more, and then especially after Kaufman passed away, I believe it was like 2001, we found all of his forged documents. We were able to determine his exact rank at the base. He wasn't an officer. He was a staff sergeant. He worked in personnel. He had forged signatures. We had to totally discount him as a witness of any sort. Well, sad to say that when Corso was researching his book and providing information to Bill Burns, he went to Roswell on 2 occasions. And one of the tip-offs was, if you were to go back and read the Corso first chapter, his recounting the overview of Roswell, his story of Roswell, it's 100% Frank Kaufman.
No wonder, because I'd read that first chapter. I'm like, this is off. I mean, there's something.
100%. And then you two, when we learned that who did Corso stay with on his 2 visits to Roswell, he stayed at the home of Frank Kaufman. And so, how sad, because Corso, if not for that, and if he could have just stuck to his story and nothing more, and it could have been just a good corroborative chapter in one of our books.
Right.
But there's any truth to his claims of the fiber optics and Kevlar and night vision and integrated circuits.
But we had already described that in our first book, that we had first-hand witnesses at Battelle and Hughes Aircraft and Rand and Los Alamos and Bureau that were already describing their attempts at reverse engineering. That's why I'm able to describe the eyewitnesses, describing how it was like microfilament fishing line.
Yeah.
Was amongst, the other wreckage. And you could hold a light up to it, and the light would emit out the opposing end. Well, they're describing fiber optics. And yet fiber optics wouldn't become, developed until 23 years later, around 1970. And then it was Kaufman who described night vision. It was Kaufman who would describe as far as the micro circuitry and microchips and that. And so where did Corso get that? Did he get it from Kaufman, or was it something that he was firsthand aware of?
It was a deliberate disinformation trying to muddy the waters.
But I would never accuse Corso of that. It was nothing deliberate.
I mean, Kaufman.
Yeah, but Kaufman it was. And, it's a book I still intend on doing, because I have all of Kaufman's files. And the point being that Kaufman was an artist. He had beautiful landscape paintings throughout his home, and he did sketches of the bodies, and there too, they looked too human. He described them as being taller than the typical grays that we have always, heard of. And he was the first one to describe that the ship wasn't disc shaped, it wasn't egg shaped, that it was more like of a bat wing, that it was more like the heel of a shoe, that type of thing. So again, you're absolutely correct, Preston, that this doesn't jive. This isn't what all the other witnesses have described.
Well, I once had the opportunity to talk to Stanton Friedman, because there was that guy, Lawrence, who put out a book, Alien Interview, about Matilda O'Donnell.
Oh,
He dismissed it instantly.
but that's a novel, and I've talked to the author, and he immediately conceded that the interview, as far as with the alien, that is totally fabricated. That but it reads. I mean, he present even that cover. You'd swear you were reading, a factual account, an actual account from an eyewitness.
I will say it was interesting, but I had a lot of questions about it.
But no, we quickly, when we heard the book was coming out, it's like, well, you're talking to this nurse. How come you're not talking to us? We'd like to know who this nurse is. It's like, sorry, Don. She doesn't exist. It's just the composite of all your nurses that you interviewed. So,
wow.
There's a lot of that goes on, not just in the area that your witnesses and stuff, but it's exploded out into the general population of ufology, and it's amazing the misinformation that's out there.
But Dolly, isn't that the nature? Like you would take something like Graceland with Elvis.
Right.
And how commercialized it's become. Well, we can even go beyond that, like even the Holy Land.
Right.
That, I mean, it's just nothing but commercialization. But it doesn't deny the event.
Right.
It doesn't deny the events at in the Holy Land. It doesn't deny that Elvis existed. And in this case, just because we have a museum and that you have a lot of charlatans, I shouldn't even say a lot, that we have a handful of opportunists who have tried to capitalize on the event.
Right.
The bottom line is, to all of us, that press release, the fact that the United States government / United States Army Air Corps announced they had captured a flying saucer. As far as I'm concerned, they started it.
Yes, they did.
They put out the press release.
100%.
The witnesses didn't. We didn't. It's not like we wrote a book and we're out to prove this happened. But it's like, no. You started it. And you tried to retract it 5 hours later. And little did you know that the Major Marcells and the Colonel Joseph Brileys and the General Thomas DuBose and the Lieutenant Colonel Walter Hott and Lieutenant Colonel, as far as Edwin Easley and Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Saunders, they would all say otherwise. They would all say the first press release was the correct one.
Yep.
So
didn't Hott say at some point, because he didn't, I don't believe he said it initially, but that he actually did see bodies as well?
Yes. He wrote, well, he didn't write, because we worked with attorneys. Just like when attorneys will write a final statement for someone like before being executed. And they'll write out for posthumous release, the truth, once and for all. That's why they're called deathbed confessions. And so Walter, we tried for the better part of 20 years to get him to open up. He would give us little tidbits. He would, one time I was sitting with Walter and we were just socializing. And all at once I just said to him, Walter, because he would call Colonel Blanchard, who was like an uncle to him. They had served for years together from, the first testing of the atomic bomb and then thereafter. And so Walter fully expected to go all the way to Washington and reach general rank. He fully thought he was going to retire, a one-star general.
Yeah.
So he always called Colonel Blanchard the old man. The old man. Yeah, in total respect, the old man. And I'm sitting there with Walter, and I say, Walter, how tall did the old man tell you the bodies were? And his hand shoots out from where he's sitting, just above shoulder height. And it's like he was acknowledging my question and the fact that Blanchard had told him something to that effect. And he brings his arm down and he looks at me and he goes, "You rotten SOB." You know, because I had tricked him. Well, I wasn't trying to trick him. I was just showing him that, Walter, you can confide to me. You can talk to me.
Well, I can only imagine the stress all of these people had. You know, there was 600 witnesses you've now documented.
Yes.
There's probably more than that, right? This
is
yes, the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, I can't tell you, Preston, how we regret we didn't start 5 years earlier, because some of the most relevant, some of the most important witnesses, you know, would have been around yet.
Yeah.
Should we have started 5 years earlier? And I can't tell you, it's one thing to deal with reluctant witnesses who just flatly refuse. You know, I swore an oath and I'm never going to talk about this again. And they take the information to their graves. But we would find witnesses. We would finally track them down at a time that you didn't have the internet. You couldn't type in someone's name and an address or phone number would come up. We had to literally, physically track these people down. And we'd find them and we'd call, and the wife would pick up and we'd hear that they just passed away a year before.
Oh,
we had one occasion that the wife picks up the phone and she's just returning from the funeral.
Oh my goodness.
It's like the information is gone forever. Whatever they possessed, I can't. It's just by far, as an investigator, the most frustrating of all experiences, because you go through all that effort and they have it just all dashed against the rocks and it's gone.
Well, we've got about 10 minutes left, so I do want to take the opportunity to pop up your books and let you say a word about each of them if you'd like before we get too far.
You're showing, and we love doing this book, this specific book, because as we were talking more and more to the actual eyewitnesses, we were often hearing what effect, what level of fear and intimidation this created for their families, their spouses, their children.
For those who can't see, this is the Children of Roswell.
And so we early learned that these people also had stories to tell.
Yeah.
These people were threatened. The parents were told, "We will kill your children if you ever talk about this again."
Yeah, absolutely. They still operate that way for a lot of stuff that goes on now. Yep.
Yes. The children would be taken aside in the separate rooms. And one, for example, was the daughter of one of the firemen, one of the crew chiefs at the Roswell Fire Department.
Frankie Rowe? Is that what you're talking
Frankie
about?
Rowe.
Yeah.
And how it was First Lieutenant Arthur Philbin. So all 6'4" of him, 250 pounds, and a big booming voice, and catching her and her sister Dottie in their bedroom, and with a baton as he kept slamming it into his hand. And if you ever say a word about what you saw or what you heard, we will take you out into the desert and they will never find you again. That type of thing. So we provided them with a chance to finally tell their side of the event. And none of them are describing a balloon. They're all saying that this was something extraordinary and that they too corroborate everything and more that their parents, their fathers, their mothers would describe. Here is inside Wright-Patterson.
Yes,
so in other words, this was the true Area 51, as I had mentioned earlier. 51 didn't even exist in 1947. So as everything was being transferred away from Roswell, you had people on the other end as the wreckage, the bodies would arrive at Wright Field, we started to track down those who were there, those who were at Foreign Technology Division, those who were on those flights, those who would unload those crates at the base, those who were, who worked as far as base commander and as deputy commander. We got the former base commander at Wright Field, who was at Foreign Technology, General Arthur Exxon, to describe to us that when the wreckage came in, again, they thought, just like Colonel Blanchard, that the materials had to be Russian because it clearly wasn't of any American design. But then after it was all thoroughly tested, tensile strength, compression, under electronic microscope, even back then, that as Exxon would describe to us, that their conclusion was unanimous, that these materials had to be from outer space. They were not made here on this planet. So we're just going, we're following as far as the chain of command. We're following the trail of the evidence. So here's a book that I had authored alone, Cover Up at Roswell, which specifically deals with how they dealt with the military personnel involved, how they dealt with the civilians involved, how they dealt with the media, how they dealt as far as with the media throughout the state, how they dealt with the politicians in Washington, how they dealt as far as with the personnel at the Pentagon. In other words, how did they cover this up? How and what extreme measures did they take from all these different levels, these different perspectives of involvement? And you will see that, my God, all of this over a weather balloon? No, absolutely not. It doesn't make
zero sense.
Yeah,
what I
zero
love about
sense.
this case is, I mean, you've tracked it from the people who saw it coming down, saw it on radar,
Right.
people who picked up the wreckage, people who guarded it, people who drove it to the base, people, every single aspect of this case. You guys have, I mean, it's amazing that anyone can still deny that this took place.
I know. And even in this book, this was the 75th anniversary edition of our Witness to Roswell book, which was the #1 selling UFO book in the world for 2.5 years. And the fact that we allow the witnesses to tell their accounts, their side of the story. In other words, we're not even asking them questions. You just tell us what you remember. How were you involved? What did you see? What did you hold in your very hands? And what convinced you? At what point were you convinced that you were dealing with something special? Something that to this time in your life, just in your twilight years, that you're still saying, as one of them did to us, it's the first thing I think about when I get up in the morning, and it's the last thing I think about when I go to bed at night.
Is this the same as the other book?
Yeah, this was the first edition of the Wright Pat book. So then the Wright Pat book was the expanded edition. Now, this is the ultimate cold case, closed. So this was our day in court, where we present this with our opening arguments, and then all of our evidentiary, and then all of our best eyewitness testimonies regarding the wreckage, the bodies, the survivor, just all the activity suggesting something major had happened. And then our final closing statements. And then basically stating at the very end, as far as we're concerned, we have demonstrating beyond any shadow of a doubt that this happened, that it's case closed, and that now the onus is on the United States government to prove otherwise.
Was this a press conference or was this before Congress?
Well, no, this was a hypothetical that should we had such an opportunity. And if just imagine if we would have had an opportunity to have all our witnesses testify before Congress. And the sad irony in the fact that now we have congressional hearings at the very time that our final first-hand witnesses have passed on.
Well, we're just about out of time. We've got 1 minute for you to say, anything you'd like to talk about in terms of upcoming events or what you're working on now.
Well, I'm working on. I have another book due by August. It's entitled a tentative United States Government versus Roswell, where I am going to demonstrate in each chapter violations of civil rights, violations of due process, violations of their First Amendment rights. And then I have 3 attorneys that are going to cite chapter and verse of where the United States government broke the law time and time again with the Roswell incident. And then I even have a retired judge who will write my foreword. So now the skeptics are going to have to deal with the judicial system. And it's not no longer just eyewitness testimony. It's they broke the law time and time again in covering up a mogul weather balloon. No, sorry.
We're going to have you back on.
Taking it to another level.
Promise to come back on. We got to unpack this some more. And I'm saying like maybe next month or May.
Sure.
May or June. Okay.
Or
I'm
2.
gonna put it down. All right. Thank you very, very much, Donald. Thank you for coming.
It was a quick 2 hours. So.
Yes, it always is. Never fails. Y'all are listening to the Lightgate. We hope your Monday has been awesome. I hope this show helped it be that way. Between a solar eclipse and this, it should be stellar. You've all been listening to us on the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM from New Orleans and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. I just thank you all so much. We're going to get you to come back, Donald. We're pinning you down and stay on with us for a minute. We love y'all. Y'all have a great week. Namaste. And be thinking of questions you can ask him the next time.
Did you read the call signs, Dolly?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I did. All right. Love y'all. Bye.
Bye, guys. Thanks, Don.
Yeah, next